Mike, did you toss most of the updates in for the?
No, so actually Mark organized it. So I tossed in the updates for the tooling one.
Okay.
Melba did the one for the positioning, and I think Mark put in most of the ones for the specification.
Okay, cool. I was just deciding if I was going to share my screen or just let you do it. I'll do it. All right. I tossed the meeting notes in the chat. Looks like Melba's going to be a little bit late. And Mark's out, I think. No, he's here. I saw something. You're going to be out. Welcome, everybody. Good to see you all on screen. This week we just have some updates from all the special interest groups / work streams / whatever the heck you want to call people doing work in a meet and having meetings. So I think the first one we're gonna start with the specification special interest group SIG. Mark, do you wanna talk through what you've been up to?
Sure. Hi everybody. So we've been working towards the 1.0 of the specification. We're still discussing high-level changes as opposed to like concrete wording of the spec, basically laying the foundation for how we will make future changes. What we in the SIG have decided so far, and here decided means like the working group did it, and we'll go for basically proposed to the rest of the group once it's ready. But just to give an update on what we've decided so far within the group is on versioning, we've agreed that to make basically once we decide for 1.0 and what each level means, we kind of agree we won't change it in the future, just so when people say SLSA 3, it just kind of continues to mean the same thing, even if we change like some small requirements, that the high level just won't change across versions. And that's to avoid confusion. There's currently in the specification, there's the common requirements at the bottom, if you remember, that is currently unspecified. We've agreed at a high level to replace that with recommendations plus a requirement around evidence of the security claims, where a build system would provide like a white paper or survey or something like that, describing how the design, implementation, and operations uphold various security invariants. And in this way, we would kind of give more information for people to make trust decisions. Another major decision is to postpone the definition of SLSA 4, basically undefine SLSA 4 for now, for the 1.0 release. Given that most of the confusion and conflicts around SLSA are around the level 4 requirements of two-party review and hermetic builds. So we'll just basically defer that to the next revision. And finally, separate tentatively, we will have two different sets of levels, one for build levels. So like a build level just describes the build integrity, like how trustworthy is the provenance, and a source level describes how trustworthy is the source. So the two-party review piece would be in the source level and not the build. And the reason for this is to allow you to make independent progress without changing how the source is built. In particular, if you use, for example, the GitHub Actions reusable workflow that's being developed, that can't make any claims about whether the code has been reviewed. And this way you could just say your SLSA X versus saying, well, SLSA X minus the two-party review requirement. And next up is figuring out how to incorporate policy, which is the piece that Visa had presented at, I think it was last week, or last meeting.
Cool. Anything you guys need help with, or calls from the broader community here to look at? Or
I think like if you have you know, everyone is welcome to join. And if you have opinions on the things that we listed so far, we're happy to hear them. I think it probably makes sense to just wait and release it like as a unit, and just kind of, instead of like having to keep trickling people's attention.
Cool. Any other questions, comments for Mark? All right. Melba, are you back online?
Yeah, sorry, my Zoom was updating. So for positioning, we essentially nailed down the key criteria and objectives for when we're evaluating different frameworks and standards and put the link there. So trying to figure out, where do we put that? Do we put that in some documentation page somewhere in the SLSA GitHub? Right now it's just in the GitHub issue, but it would be nice to put that somewhere so that if other people want to evaluate and help, it's actually posted somewhere. So that's the one question. And then the next thing is, you know, obviously we need, or we're going to have the SIG participants start evaluating the frameworks, the additional frameworks and standards that we've listed in that GitHub issue. So if anybody else wants to participate, by all means, you can do it offline. But yeah, we're just looking for anyone and everyone that can help. I'm even trying to recruit some IBM legal lawyers or IBM cybersecurity legal that are well-versed in some of the standards and help me map some of the SLSA levels to the standards. So I'm not sure if you have an answer for that. Where do we post something like that? The criteria objectives.
This thing, I mean, can we just make a new folder under the repo, or?
I don't know, right? Because we don't have, like, you know, folders for each of the SIGs, right? So trying to figure out where do we put something like this to formally capture it.
I don't see why we couldn't make a folder in here for positioning. Does anyone see any issues with that? Yeah, I think we can just throw a new folder up here for positioning, or maybe under resources. I don't remember what's in there today. Yeah, toss it there.
Because, and that actually begs the other question of, when we do produce artifacts, like, for example, when we finalize a spreadsheet, or if we have some sort of, outside of blogs, like if we, like, I guess the framework of visualization as an example, would we put it under docs folder, right? So just trying to get a sense of how that would work.
Is this intended for publication to like basically the public, or is this just for kind of team, like in SLSA internal discussions?
Oh, which one are you referring to? The evaluation criteria or the diagram?
Well, I guess either. My inclination. Go ahead.
Go ahead. You can continue.
I was gonna say my inclination would be that, or at least my default would be, things that we want to like publish to the world would make sense to go on the website. And so if we find some way to be able to post things on the website, because that's just easier for people to get to,
I see.
Display, so that was in the docs folder. If it's stuff that's just internal to us, to like, you know, members of the community that are working on this, it seems kind of heavyweight to do that. And so just having some other folder within the repo, or different, or optionally a different repo. That way.
That answers the question then. Yeah. So the criteria would be members only, and it would be obviously in here. But something like the visualization would be more of a website item. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, at least that's my inclination.
Seems fine.
We also kind of expanded on the initial scope and charter, which is also in the GitHub issue, but we want to submit a PR for, I know Josh had a a document that defined the SIGs. And so we want to, one, get agreement from the broader community on what the positioning SIG is attempting to accomplish, and what their scope is. For example, I think there's a mention of like the US government, but there are other frameworks that are from other governments, right? And so where does that lie? Should we generalize it more, et cetera? And then we discuss I don't want to call it a framework anymore. I want to call it a visualization, end-to-end supply chain visualization. And so it was a pretty lively discussion on, what changes to make on that visualization to add clarification, and then, start doing overlays. Well, this is where SLSA works, and this is where some of these other framework standards, this is what they attempt to address. So just updating that visualization and then putting it back to the community to get more feedback. That's about it.
Never find the mute button. Cool. For the scope and charter, it looks like you're going to submit a PR and then folks can review it. Do you want to discuss that now, or do you just want to?
No, I want to clean up the language because it was very much any thoughts that came to mind from the community. I just put it in the GitHub issue. So I want to kind of formalize it more because a lot of it overlaps. So once the language is formalized in a PR, then we can, review it.
Okay. Sounds good. Any comments, questions for Melba? All right. Tooling.
Sure. So we started off by mostly focusing on building out some categories for the different kinds of SLSA tooling that we think makes sense. And so we're also generating a spreadsheet for it, which should hopefully be done soon. But the basic idea behind it is, right, we want to kind of build out a bunch of categories for the tool. So like stuff like building and producing SLSA provenance, distribution and discovery of that provenance, verification and decisioning on that provenance, and then other sorts of related kinds of things like, hey, does it make sense to sort of work with some of the packaging ecosystems to see what needs to be done and what needs to be integrated with some of that. So as an example, the NPM RFC that came out, I guess it was, I think last week, we've been already working with one of the folks who's leading that up from the NPM side, Frederick, who he's been joining the SLSA tooling meetings. And we're looking at like, hey, is there effort we can give to sort of, from a hands-on keyboard perspective, actually help out with things that need to be done from the NPM tooling to sort of get it to integrate with SLSA. So, and we're also looking at potentially other packaging ecosystems like PyPI or whatever else. And then also with other things on that end. Actually, before I move on, Mark.
Yeah, I realize I think it's happened since the last community meeting. It might be worth briefly mentioning to the community in case people are unaware of the NPM work that's happening.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So for folks who aren't familiar, NPM announced, I believe it was last week. It's been very, very busy few weeks, so I don't lose track of time. But NPM announced recently that they will be using SigStore to do signing for NPM packages so that we can verify identities. And one of the other things that wasn't in the announcement, but was in the RFC, is that they do plan on actually integrating with SLSA. So the idea would be, you as a consumer of NPM stuff, the goal would be you can run NPM install. You might have a set of trusted keys or whatever. and be able to install NPM with some level of NPM packages based on some sort of policy. So you can say, hey, I require NPM to have SLSA level 2 for all their provenance for the packages I download, that kind of thing. That's going to be a very, very long road, but this is part of the work to try and better NPM's software supply chain, because given that NPM is such a huge ecosystem and millions upon millions of downloads, it's also one that is often attacked for supply chain, often is involved in supply chain attacks. And so we're looking to sort of see where we can also help out on that front. So yeah, that's one of the pieces of the NPM, one of the pieces of also the package ecosystem integration. So we're looking at that as well. Another thing that is something that we want to maybe, eventually hand off to the adoption group, but maybe is something along the lines of like SLSA the hard way, or some sort of initial kind of like, training kind of thing of this is some sort of best practices, blogs, that kind of thing. And then the other stuff is like other tooling. So things like, we're related somewhat to what's going on in the SBOM world, and are there areas where we can integrate the tooling and so on. So this is like SBOM. This is stuff like, for example, for the source, when we do integrate source requirements into SLSA, we're looking at stuff like, hey, how does the PRs look, and what would the tooling there look? That's a little bit more long term. And then finally, one of the other topics is what to do about endemic sorts of tools that are related to builds and related to SLSA at some level, but they're maybe not integrated with SLSA today. So this is stuff like Jenkins, and we know that there's lots of different folks who are starting to poke around with generating provenance through Jenkins. But hey, can we start to consolidate those folks together so that we don't have like 5 or 6 different ways of doing it in the open source world? And looking at other build tools to make it clear, right? Because I think some folks are also worried that the primary builders for SLSA right now are mostly GitHub Actions, and there's also Tecton that supports it and Fresca that supports it, but I think GitHub Actions seems to be the really popular one that folks are starting to really look at. But people are asking some legitimate questions, about, even though like, hey, GitLab does support it, but there seems to be some confusion about who supports what, and what can we do to also integrate with more open source tools and promote that a little bit more.
Very cool. Any questions, comments for Mike? All right. Mark was reading my mind and added a topic here as everyone was speaking. I was thinking about the website, and it's probably not being updated as frequently as we hope. Mark, I'll let you just talk about this.
There's certain things that like we have open issues for, and I talked about it in previous community meetings. Like the implementation leaves something to be desired. There's certain changes, like how the way the thing is built, how it's actually implemented, like how much HTML we need, etc. And also like how we do versioning of specifications and stuff like that. So I'm trying to put together like basically a request for proposals on how to like maybe contract that out or something like that to make changes. So this wouldn't be content changes, which I think we need someone from the community to write, but just more of the mechanical changes that we could easily like describe. I have a list in my mind of things that we'd like to do based on what's in GitHub issues, but I want to put out a call if anyone has any other thoughts, to just either bring it up now or contact me.
One thing I would add, I think the SIG-Store folks are kind of bumping into the same issues. So I think they're looking at different frameworks and stuff to kind of rebuild that site on top of. So I don't know if it's worth just chatting technically that's of interest, but I think they're kind of in the same situation.
Will do, thanks.
And just to chime in, for the website, and Mark, I know you mentioned for the specification special interest group, sounds like a political organization, special interest group. I know the specification, we're kind of talking about maybe having different levels for different subcategories. So I could definitely see, you know, updating the website to accommodate those different levels for different categories being relatively crucial. So I think that's probably something you're talking about, right?
Yeah, I'd like the time of the members here to be spent on like writing content and figuring out how to do it, and not spent so much on like, how do I organize the markdown files or work with this framework or the theme or whatever to be able to organize this way. That seems like something that we could just like, you know, that's a generic thing that doesn't require this special knowledge of the people in this group.
I'm going to ask a very literal question, which is, do you mean that you want to like set up a static site generator of some kind, or pick one? Or
yeah, we have one now. It's based on Jekyll on GitHub Pages, but the theme requires like a bunch of CSS, and like you have to sprinkle a bunch of divs and classes all over the place, and to get it to look good is a pain, and like the block quotes aren't formatted correctly. There's no correct spacing between paragraphs. You can't have two submenus in the main menu because like when you click one, they both come down, like a bunch of like implementation stuff like that with the theme. Ideally also, we have different versions of the spec right now. We just create a different folder and like just copy and paste the files and then make modifications. It doesn't really, it's not great for tracking version history because you have to like do diffs, and Git doesn't really do well for copies. Like by default, you have to use like some flag that no one ever remembers to use. And so I'd like to think about like, can we just do it in say a branch? And so we're always building and like kind of do it more naturally in version control. And then it's the build process that assembles it into the different versions. Sort of like, so the SPDX community, William Bartholomew in particular, is doing something similar for the SPDX docs around like keeping track of branches, and when you tag it automatically builds. And so I talked to him a little bit about how they're doing. They're using a different static site generator. They're using Make Docs, and we're using Jekyll right now. And so I think, well, at any rate, we're not using Make Docs, and what they're using is Make Docs. So the specific implementation he has wouldn't work for us. So there's some amount of like work in changing that.
So do you just want to move to Make Docs and make it simple?
That would, I think that's a fine option. All of it is work though. Like we need someone to actually do it and like translate the templates, etc.
yeah, the translating the templates is the time-consuming part. I'm a maniac, so I tried like 5 different static site generators last year and moved my site between them. And by far the hardest part was everybody had a different layout and different clever ways of defining shared styles.
Sounds like an opportunity to start a company.
Content guard.
So at any rate, if you have thoughts on this, please reach out. Otherwise, I'll just kind of make a proposal based on what I've been seeing in issues.
Cool. Kind of related to Melba's next topic here. I don't have any updates yet on the TAC and the definitions. I'll take it as an AI though, unless anyone else in the room has updates on what they're up to. I know there's still some like just governance, higher level governance discussion going on there, and there is budget in this foundation, so theoretically, like, we could put up a proposal that says, hey, we need some help with the website, and see if we can get some support that way. Melba, did you have anything else you wanted to sort of add to this, or?
Yeah, it was just more because I don't think I've attended like maybe the last meeting, but I know the one that I did attend, was kind of like, well, do we take SLSA out from underneath the supply chain integrity working group, right? Are we considered I can't remember, a working group versus a SIG, right? And there was just a lot of questions of what are they doing with us? So just trying to get an update.
Got it. Jacques?
The money question has come up a lot in TAC and in the planning committee calls. Brian Bellendorf had a document which was his take on how the money works, or how money can be obtained, which I've dropped a link into the chat. And some of it was through TAC, some of it was funds directed by the governing board. There were also the special interest funds, and like Alpha Omega, where people have donated money with a specific mission. And then finally, there's the streams funding, where there's a bunch of companies that have lined up and said, we have all this money ready. As soon as you come to us with shovel-ready projects, we will slap money on the table. So you can sort of fit SLSA into one of those 10 work streams that the mobilization plan laid out. You can probably get some money out of that, because I don't know that anybody has done that yet. And I expect that the folks who signed up to give money would like to give the money, because it's burning a hole on their balance sheet.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'll try to get some updates unless anyone else beats me to it, or Mike.
Yeah, I think I know some of us would like to understand a bit more, because especially when you start talking about like hands-on keyboard with some of the open source work, there are folks who are like, hey, I would love to contribute, but without some sort of money or whatever funding to start contributing more to some of the actual features and some of that sort of work. It's hard for some folks to do that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Any other last minute topics? No. Cool. All right. Have a good day, everybody.
Bye, everyone.